Rambam begins with tshuva by telling us that a person is obligated to do tshuva for all chatoim, a chet that one did b'mezid intentionally, a chet that a person did b'shogeg unintentionally. And this observation of the Rambam, that tshuva is required, even though it was quote unquote not my fault. So this, of course, is borne out by many, many halachos. There are halachos that tell us the person performs certain chatoim b'shogeg, he has to offer certain kavanos. There's the parsha of chatos and the parshas in the Torah that speak about even chatoim, even averos that are done unintentionally. We find when it comes to a rotzech b'shogeg, person who takes somebody's life, albeit unintentionally, also requires a kapar, requires an atonement, has to go to Golos, has to go to your miklot. So the notion that it wasn't my fault, I didn't know, I didn't mean it, in a certain sense, is not an acceptable excuse. Now, obviously, there is a difference between a chet b'mezid, a chet b'shogeg, both in terms of dinei shemayim, in terms of the heavenly court, in terms of beis and shamatim, in terms of this court. There's no question that there is a notion a person does b'shogeg, so he's not going to be subject to certain onshim, certain punishment. But nevertheless, just to say that it's a freebie and all is fine and it all was unintentional and therefore I don't have to do anything about it, that is clearly not correct. Why should that be so? Why should it be that a person should be held accountable for things that he ultimately didn't really know about? He ultimately really wasn't planning on doing anything that was wrong. So I think the answer is found in actually multiple conversations that take place in Parshas Vayera between Avram Avinu and Avimelech, the king of Gerar, Melech Gerar, Avimelech, who interacts with Avram Avinu several occasions. And if you look at the different events that occur, the different interactions that take place with Avram Avinu and Avimelech, there is clearly a theme that develops between them, and that is Avimelech is in the wrong, but he almost, in a certain sense, rightfully defends himself by saying, he didn't know. I was a shogeg. I wasn't aware. Torah tells us that when Avram Avinu arrives in the land of Avimelech, so he tells people, Sarah, it's not his wife, his sister. And Avimelech takes Sarah, and actually almost is chotei with Sarah. And then the Kadosh Baruch Hu appears to Avimelech, tells him that he's in big trouble, what he's about to do. And Avimelech responds, but I didn't know. Nobody told me. How was I supposed to know? And the next morning, when he confronts Avram Avinu, he repeats that claim and says, but I didn't know. I was a shogeg. And an almost identical conversation occurs a little bit later on in the parasha, where here it doesn't involve the issue of Gili Arayas of Eshesish, but rather it involves the chet of Gezela, of theft. And here, Avram Avinu confronts Avimelech and says that your servants, people who you are in charge of, you are supposed to be supervising, they stole my wells. Asher gazlu avdei Avimelech. And Avimelech immediately is on the defense. Lo yadati, I didn't know. V'gam atalo, he got it to me, and you didn't tell me. V'lo shemati, I didn't hear it. Three different responses, all saying the same thing. It's not my fault, I didn't know. Time and time again, Avimelech is confronted that either he personally or those who he is responsible for are involved in a potentially very serious crime. And at both times he responds, he didn't know. And the truth is he was right. In neither case did he know. He did not know that Sarah was Avram's wife. He did not know about the stealing of the wells. And yet, Avimelech is taken to task twice. Why is that? So, Avram Avinu says to Avimelech, let me give you a little bit of a background. Rak and Yeras Lakim b'makom. Avram Avinu says to Avimelech, why did I have to make up the story about Sarah? Why can't I just said straight out she's my wife? Why do I have to tell such a roundabout just to prevent myself from getting killed, my wife, prevent my wife from being taken? Rak and Yeras Lakim b'makom. Because I'm entering into a land where there's no Yeshemayim. People are not afraid for Kadosh Baruch Hu. There's no fear of heaven here. And when there's no Yerushalayim, anything and everything can happen. And I think it's that phrase, Rak in Yiras Elokim B'Makom Hazeh, that ultimately is the greatest musa, the greatest tochacha to Avimelech. Avimelech, it's true that you didn't know the details in either of these two cases. However, you have created for yourself an environment, a kingdom that's lacking in Yiras Shamayim. When one lacks Yiras Shamayim, one doesn't take things seriously. One is not concerned about chait. One lives a very, very lackadaisical, takes a very lackadaisical approach to Shmiras HaMitzvahs. And there's no Yiras Shamayim, there's no B'chintim Pachtacho, Sh'lekenu. And when a person doesn't have that awe and trepidation, the Kadosh Baruch Hu is watching us, so mistakes tend to creep in. And yes, it's true, the details, in fact, Avimelech can be excused for. But he cannot be excused for creating an environment that lends itself to sloppiness, that lends itself to a lack of proper care, meticulous observance of mitzvahs. Perhaps that's the message to the Choti B'Shegeg. It's true, the particulars of what occurred are not really your fault. When you swung that axe, you didn't really mean to kill the other person. Granted. But Rakid Yiras Elokim. If you had Yiras Shamayim, if you really were concerned, if you really had the proper understanding, so then such things wouldn't have happened. And for the person who he forgot it was Shabbos, and he did a malacha b'shogeg, so we say to him, you're right, you didn't mean to be chayte, you didn't mean to do anything bad, but how could you forget it Shabbos? Rakin Yiras Elokim b'makom hazeh. If you forgot it Shabbos, that's indicative that there's something missing, something lacking in Yiras Shamayim. So Yiras Shamayim sets the tone, sets the aura for our lives. When Yiras Shamayim is there in its full glory, so by definition, our care to mitzvahs will be much greater. And if Yiras Shamayim is lacking, we're deficient in a proper observance of Yiras Shamayim, so then many, many chatoim, quote unquote, b'shogeg, are going to seep in. Perhaps the tshuva, the kapara that's required for chet b'shogeg, is to repair and to rectify that lack of Yiras Shamayim that got us into this problem in the first place. Parsha concludes in Vayera. Kadosh Baruch Hu tells Avraham Avinu at the end of the Akedah that now I know ki yireh Elokim ata. Avraham Avinu is not only the Ish HaChesed, not only the great Ma'amin, not only all the great things we already learned about him in Parshas Lech Lecha, but now he is crowned with the title of Yireh Elokim. He's a Yiras Shamayim as well. We, the descendants of Avraham Avinu, are the recipients of that Barosha, that heritage of Yiras Shamayim. Kadosh Baruch Hu will help us in striving to attain this Yiras Shamayim, and by doing so, we'll be able to observe the mitzvahs, each and every one of the mitzvahs. Everybody, a wonderful Shabbos.